The first time my trust was broken, I was too young to understand what it cost me. The second time someone tried to break it, I was old enough to know exactly what I was doing when I showed up unannounced at a lake house in the middle of nowhere on a Thursday afternoon with a bouquet of flowers in my hand and the kind of quiet in my chest that only comes right before everything changes. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 41 years old, civil contractor out of Raleigh, North Carolina. And I have been through the kind of slow, calculated betrayal that doesn't announce itself. It builds, quietly. The way water gets into a foundation, invisible until the day the floor shifts and you realize it's been happening for months. Here's what I knew walking into that lake house. My wife had told me she was on a girls' weekend with her college friends. 3 days, 2 nights, a rental cabin near Jordan Lake. No big deal. She'd done it before. Here's what I didn't know. There were no college friends, and the man sitting on the back deck of that cabin when I walked around the corner, the man who looked up from his beer and saw me standing there with a gas station bouquet and 4 hours of highway behind me, he had been sending my wife messages for 6 months. I know because I read them all before I drove out there. I just needed him to know that too. Welcome to Calm Drama Stories. I'm going to tell you everything. Stay with me. Let me tell you who I was before any of this happened, because context matters in a story like this. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, middle child of 3. My father was a general contractor who built houses from the ground up with his own hands and believed that a man's word and his work were the same thing. You said you'd do something, you did it. You built something, you built it right. No shortcuts, no half measures. I took that into everything, my career, my friendships, and eventually, my marriage. I spent my 20s building a contracting business from 2 employees and a used pickup truck into a mid-sized operation with 22 people on payroll and a reputation in the Triangle area that I worked a decade to earn. I'm not wealthy in the way that gets written about, but I'm stable, honest, and I built every inch of it myself. I was married once before. Her name was Carla. We were together from 23 to 28, married for 2 of those years. It ended because Carla decided somewhere in year 4 of our relationship that she had married potential, and what she actually wanted was a rival. She needed someone who had already become the thing, not someone still becoming it. She left clean. No dramatic scene. Just a conversation at our kitchen table one evening that lasted 40 minutes and ended with her telling me she cared about me but couldn't see the life she wanted in the life we had. I don't vilify Carla. She was honest. She left instead of staying and making us both miserable. There's a version of that story where she's the villain, and I tried that version for about a year. It didn't fit right. What it left me with, though, was a specific scar. The quiet, persistent belief that I was a man people left when something better became visible. That I was a stepping stone. A good man for a certain season, but not the destination. I carried that into my 30s without fully naming it. Then I met Priya. Priya Anand walked into a project bid meeting in the fall of 2017. She was the interior design consultant hired by the developer whose commercial renovation I was contracted to build out. She arrived 7 minutes late, apologized to no one, set her portfolio on the conference table, and within 4 minutes had redirected the entire conversation in a direction that was clearly better than where it had been going. I watched that and thought, that woman knows exactly what she's doing and doesn't need anyone's permission to do it. We talked after the meeting, then we talked over coffee 3 days later. Then we talked on the phone for 2 hours on a Tuesday night about everything except the project. We dated for a year and a half. I moved slowly, the same way I'd moved with everything since Carla. Deliberately, testing the load before I committed weight to it. Priya was patient with that. She told me early on, Daniel, I'm not going anywhere. You can take your time. And she meant it, or she seemed to mean it, which I now understand is not always the same thing. We married in October 2019. Small wedding. Her family, my family, a few close friends. The kind of ceremony that's about the 2 people in it rather than the production around them. My older brother Marcus was my best man. Her college roommate Jade was her maid of honor. The first 2 years were good. Genuinely good. We built a life that fit us. She continued her design work, growing her client list. I ran my contracting business. We bought a house in North Raleigh, a craftsman bungalow that needed work, which I did myself on weekends because that's how I rest. We had rhythms. Sunday morning runs on the Greenway. Friday night dinners at a Thai place on Glenwood Avenue where they knew our order. The particular, easy conversation of two people who have stopped performing for each other and are just themselves. And then, in the spring of 2022, a man named Garrett Hollis entered Priya's professional world. Garrett was a real estate developer, mid-40s, divorced, the kind of man who had converted a moderate inheritance into a significant portfolio and wore that conversion on him at all times. He hired Priya's firm to handle interiors on a high-end residential development he was building in the Cary area, about 20 minutes from Raleigh. It was a substantial contract for her, her biggest to that point. She was excited about it, and I was genuinely happy for her because I understood what it meant to land the job that changes the trajectory. I met Garrett twice in the first year. Once at a project event Priya invited me to, once at a dinner where he was one of several people at the table. He was charming in the smooth, practiced way of men who have spent decades in rooms where charm is currency. He shook my hand with the right amount of pressure, asked about my contracting work with the right amount of interest, and said nothing that was wrong. Something about him filed itself in the back of my mind, the way a hairline crack files itself. Not alarm, awareness. I didn't say anything to Priya. I had no reason to. One dinner, one project event. A feeling is not evidence. My father taught me that. A feeling is a starting point, not a conclusion. But I noticed, and I started paying attention. The first thing I noticed was the phone. Not dramatically. Not the kind of thing that reads as suspicious in isolation. Priya had always been someone who kept her phone near her, which made sense for a person running a design business where client communication was constant. I'd never thought anything of it. But in the summer of 2022, something about the way she held it changed. A slight angle adjustment when I came into a room, a faster reach when it lit up. A particular quality of casual that wasn't quite casual. I am, by profession and by nature, a man who reads structure. I look at buildings and see the bones, the load paths, the places where stress accumulates. I look at people the same way. And the structure of Priya's behavior around her phone had changed in a way I couldn't precisely name but couldn't stop seeing. I didn't go through her phone. I want to be clear about that. At that stage, I had a feeling, and a feeling doesn't entitle you to someone else's privacy. That's not how I operate. Instead, I paid attention to patterns. The late evenings in her home office that started stretching longer, not dramatically, not by hours, but by increments. 30 minutes here, 45 minutes there. The door that used to stay open now sometimes closed. The weekend she came home from a site visit and was quiet in the specific way that meant she was somewhere else in her head. I asked what was on her mind. She said work stress. I let it go because work stress was real and I had no reason not to believe her. The shift in the texture of our conversations. They didn't stop. I want to be precise about this. Priya and I kept talking, kept having dinner, kept running the Greenway on Sundays. But something in the quality of her presence had changed. She was there and slightly elsewhere at the same time. I told myself I was reading into things. I told myself the Carla scar was making me see danger where there wasn't any. I told myself I was projecting old pain onto a new situation. I told myself that for about 4 months. Then, in October 2022, I found a message. Not by going through her phone, by accident, in the most ordinary possible way. I was downstairs and her phone was on the kitchen counter and it lit up with a preview notification. I wasn't trying to read it. It was just there, and I was 2 feet from it and it lit up. The preview showed 3 words before the screen went dark. Missing you already. No name, just a contact initial. G. I stood at the kitchen counter for a moment. Then I started dinner. I didn't say anything that night. I needed to think. Here's what I knew about myself in that moment. I had 2 options. Option 1 was to confront Priya immediately, emotionally, with 3 words and an initial. Option 2 was to find out what I was actually dealing with before I said anything at all. I chose option 2, not out of cowardice. Out of the same discipline my father built into me when I was 16 years old and helping him frame a house. He said, "Daniel, before you swing a hammer, look at what you're swinging at, because you can't unswing it." I couldn't unswing this, so I looked first. Over the next 3 weeks, I paid a level of attention that I am not proud of, but will be honest about. I didn't touch her phone. I didn't install anything. I didn't hire anyone. What I did was watch the frequency of the late office evenings, the way she oriented her body when a certain call came in, the business trips that had started requiring overnight stays when they hadn't before. I talked to Marcus, my brother, the one person I trusted to hear something like this and not turn it into a family event. Marcus is 4 years older than me, steady in the way of people who went through something hard early and came out the other side with their judgment intact. He listened to the whole thing over the phone one night without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "What are you going to do?" "Find out," I said. "And then?" "Depends what I find." He said, "If you need me, I'm 4 hours away and I can be there in 3.5. That's my brother. What I found came in February 2023. Not from surveillance, not from anything covert. From Priya's own laptop, left open on the kitchen table when she went to take a shower. I wasn't looking. The screen was on, and the message thread on it was open and visible from where I stood. I read enough in 30 seconds to understand what I was looking at. I walked to the back porch. I stood there in the February cold for a long time. Then I went back inside and closed the laptop to exactly where it had been, and I made a decision about what came next. I didn't tell Priya what I'd seen, not yet, because what I'd seen gave me information, but not the full picture. And I had learned at some cost the difference between knowing something and understanding it. What I did over the next several months was take stock of everything. Our finances, which were entangled in the way of 2 people who had built a life together. The business, which had no connection to Priya, but which I would need clear-headed to protect. The house, which we co-owned. I called an attorney, a family law attorney named Patricia Holt in downtown Raleigh. I told her I needed to understand my options in the event of a divorce without yet committing to anything. She was practical and thorough and did not dramatize the conversation. I spent those months building clarity, not anger, clarity. Anger is a feeling. Clarity is a tool. In April 2023, Priya told me she was planning a girls' weekend. 3 days, 2 nights, Jordan Lake, a rental cabin with college friends she stayed in touch with. She'd done a version of this before. I had no reason to question it on its face. I said, "That sounds like a good break. You've been working hard." She smiled with something in it that I cataloged and didn't comment on. After she left on Thursday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee. I had the address of the rental cabin, not from anything covert. She'd mentioned the general area when she booked it, and the rental confirmation had come to our shared email account, which I had legitimate access to. I looked at the address for a while. Then I called my brother. "Marcus," I said, "I need to know something and I need to know it clean." He said, "Tell me." I told him everything. The October message, the February laptop, the attorney visit, the months of quiet accounting, all of it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" "To come with me," I said, "because I'm driving to Jordan Lake this afternoon and I don't want to do it alone." He said, "I'll be at your house in 3.5 hours. He was there in 3 hours and 20 minutes. That's Marcus. We drove to Jordan Lake on a Thursday afternoon in April. 4 hours, mostly quiet. The kind of quiet between brothers who have said the necessary things and don't need to fill the air with extra. I had flowers, gas station flowers from a stop about an hour outside Raleigh. Marcus looked at them in the back seat. "Why flowers?" he said. "Because I want him to see them," I said. "I want the first thing he sees when he looks at me to be that I'm a man who showed up to surprise his wife with flowers. And I want that to be the last thing he sees too." Marcus nodded. He understood. We pulled up to the cabin at 3:47 in the afternoon. A silver Audi I didn't recognize was parked next to Priya's car in the gravel lot. I sat in my truck for a moment. Marcus put his hand on my arm. "You sure?" "Yes," I said, and I was. The clarity I'd been building for months was completely intact. No rage, no shaking. Just the particular stillness of a man who has looked at the full structure and knows exactly which load-bearing wall he's about to remove. I got out. I got the flowers. I walked around the side of the cabin toward the back deck where the lake view would be. And that's where I found them. He saw me before Priya did. Garrett Hollis, sitting in an Adirondack chair on the back deck of a lake cabin, beer in hand, looking out at Jordan Lake on a Thursday afternoon. He turned when he heard footsteps on the gravel path, and he saw me, and something went through his face in a sequence I watched with the complete attention of a man who has been waiting a long time for this exact moment. First recognition. He knew who I was. I had met him twice, and apparently that was enough. Then calculation. The rapid internal accounting of a man determining his options. Then something underneath both of those that was either guilt or its practical cousin, fear of consequence. Priya heard him react and turned from where she'd been standing at the deck railing. She saw me. The color left her face. I walked up the deck steps with the flowers in my hand, and I set them on the table between the two chairs. "I thought I'd surprise you," I said to Priya. My voice was completely even. "I drove 4 hours, brought flowers." She said my name, just my name. "Daniel." "It's okay," I said. "I'm not going to do anything dramatic. I'm going to say what I came to say, and then Marcus and I are going to drive home." Garrett stood up. He was trying to find the angle, the way men like that always try to find the angle. "Daniel," he started. "I think I'll get to you," I said. "I want to talk to my wife first." He stopped. I looked at Priya. She was gripping the railing behind her, and she was not the composed, directed woman I'd watched redirect a conference room in 2017. She was a person who had been found out and was still deciding how to hold that. "I read the messages," I said. "In February, on the laptop. I've had 4 months to think about what I wanted to say. So I'm going to say it, and I need you to listen." She nodded. "I know what this is," I said. "I know how long it's been going on. I know what he is to you and what you told him about us. I read enough to understand the shape of it." She closed her eyes. "I'm not going to stand here and perform being destroyed," I said. "Because I'm not destroyed. I'm clear. Maybe for the first time in a long time, I'm completely clear." I turned to Garrett. He was standing by his chair, trying to hold himself in a posture that wasn't quite retreat and wasn't quite confrontation. A man looking for neutral ground in a situation that didn't have any. "Garrett," I said, "I want you to know that I know everything, not because I was surveilling anyone, because things were visible and I paid attention. I know about the trips, I know about the February messages, I know about the October message that started this." His jaw was tight. "I'm not going to threaten you," I said. "I'm a contractor from Raleigh. You have more money than I'll probably ever have. If we went to war, you'd have better lawyers, and I understand that math." I paused. "But I want you to hear what you actually did. You didn't just have an affair with a married woman. You targeted someone who came to you with a professional relationship, and you exploited it deliberately over time. That's not a passion story. That's a calculation. And the kind of man who makes that calculation about someone else's wife is the kind of man nobody should trust with their business, their property, or their money." I let that land. "I'm not going to call your clients. I'm not going to go to the press. But you should know that I could, and you should know that I'm choosing not to, because I'm the kind of man who doesn't need to burn things to feel powerful. I just need you to understand that I see you clearly, all the way through." Garrett said nothing. His beer was still in his hand, and I watched him realize that and set it down. The lake was completely quiet behind them. I turned back to Priya, and this was the hardest part. Not the confrontation with Garrett. That was just clarity applied to a problem. The hardest part was standing in front of the woman I had chosen deliberately and carefully and loved for 6 years and saying the true thing. I loved you the right way, I said. I know I did. I wasn't perfect, but I was present and I was honest and I showed up for this marriage every single day. I need you to know I know that. Her eyes were full. I came here today not because I thought I could fix it. I came because I needed you to see me standing here, knowing everything and still not falling apart. Because the version of me you were protecting Garrett from, the man you thought would break, I need you to know that man doesn't exist anymore. Maybe he never did, she said. Daniel, I'm so sorry. And it came out of her like something that had been under pressure for a long time. Not the polished apology, the real one, the kind that doesn't have a follow-up request attached to it. I know you are, I said. I believe that, and I'm still leaving. I picked the flowers back up off the table, not dramatically, just because I'd brought them and they were mine, and I wasn't leaving anything of mine here. Marcus appeared at the corner of the deck. He'd been waiting by the truck. He took one look at my face and nodded and went back to the passenger side. I walked down the deck steps. I got to the bottom and I stopped. Because there was one more thing. The thing I'd actually driven 4 hours to say. Not to Garrett. To myself. I turned around and looked at the cabin, at Priya still at the railing, at the lake behind her, at the whole ordinary beauty of a Thursday afternoon that had just reoriented my entire life. You know what the difference is? I said, mostly to myself, but loud enough that she heard it. Between a man who doesn't know and a man who does? She waited. The man who doesn't know is afraid of what he might find. The man who does know isn't afraid of anything anymore. I turned and walked back to my truck. Marcus was in the passenger seat. He didn't say anything when I got in. He just handed me a water bottle from the back seat. I drove home, 4 hours. Mostly quiet, the same road in reverse. Somewhere around the 2-hour mark, Marcus said, "You okay?" "Yes," I said. He believed me because it was true. I filed for divorce the following Monday. Patricia Holt had the paperwork mostly prepared from our earlier conversations. She said I had been thorough in my documentation and the process would likely be straightforward given what I'd established. She was right. Priya didn't contest it. I think she had made her own accounting in those 4 hours after I drove away from the lake. We divided things fairly. The house sold 8 months later, and we split the proceeds exactly as the attorneys outlined. I moved into a rental in East Raleigh while I figured out the next house. I kept the business running. I kept my 22 people employed. I showed up every day the same way I always had because the business didn't deserve to absorb the cost of my personal life. Marcus came down the month after everything, and we rebuilt the porch steps on the rental, which didn't need rebuilding. But we needed something to do with our hands and wood, and tools are how the Mercer men process things. We worked all day Saturday and ordered pizza, and he didn't bring up Priya once, and neither did I. I called Patricia Holt 2 months after the divorce finalized to close out some paperwork, and she asked how I was doing. I told her I was fine, and she said, "And I've thought about this since." Mr. Mercer, in my experience, the men who do best after something like this are the ones who don't waste their clarity being angry. You seem like you're in that category. I thought about that a lot. She was right. I wasn't angry. I had been clear, and I remained clear, and the clarity was more useful than anger would have been. What happened with Garrett, I heard through a professional contact about 8 months later. Priya and Garrett didn't last past the summer. I don't know the details, and I don't need them. What I know is that the thing he'd built with my wife while dismantling my marriage wasn't built on anything that held weight. Things built that way generally don't. About Priya. This is the part people always want to know. What do I feel about her? Honest answer. I don't feel the hot things. Not anymore. What I feel is something closer to grief. The clean kind. The kind that doesn't look for someone to blame because blame doesn't change the structure of what happened. She made choices. They cost us both the life we'd been building. That's the truth, and it's enough. What I didn't expect was what happened 6 months after the divorce. I got a call from her, Priya, not asking for anything, not with a request trailing behind her words. She just called on a Sunday afternoon and said she'd been in therapy and there were things she needed to say that she hadn't said properly at the lake. I listened. She said she had been running from something in herself that had nothing to do with me, a fear she'd carried for years about whether she was capable of choosing the life she actually wanted or whether she would always undermine it. She said I had been a good husband. She said that clearly. She said the failure was hers, not a failure in me. I told her I appreciated her saying it. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was more than okay. I told her I was building something, and I was building it right. She said she hoped it went well for me, and she sounded like she meant it. We haven't spoken since. I don't expect we will. Some chapters end, and the right thing is to let them end clean. My name is still Daniel Mercer. I'm still a contractor in Raleigh. I still have 22 people on payroll and a reputation I worked a decade to build. I run the Greenway on Sunday mornings, alone now, but not lonely. Eden was Priya's dog, technically, and she took him, which was right. But I've been thinking about getting a dog of my own, something steady, a lab probably. The Craftsman bungalow I bought last spring needed more work than the listing suggested. I'm doing it on weekends. My hands know what to do with wood and time, and I find that the work settles something in me that nothing else quite reaches. Last month, Marcus drove down, and we framed out the addition on the back of the house. 2 days, just the two of us, the way we worked on job sites with our father when we were teenagers. We didn't talk about Priya. We talked about the joinery and the load paths and which wood would weather best. At the end of the second day, standing back and looking at what we'd framed, Marcus said, "That's solid." I said, "It'll hold." He said, "Yeah." And he looked at me when he said it, not at the addition. I know what he meant. Here is what I want to leave you with: a wound that hasn't healed and a wound that has looked similar from the outside. The scar tissue is there either way, but one of them gives way under pressure and one of them is actually stronger than the original material. I spent years after Carla believing I was the kind of man people left, that I was good for a season but not a destination. I carried that into my marriage with Priya and I never fully set it down, and Garrett Hollis found it in the dark and used it like a lever. Here's what I know now. He didn't break anything that wasn't already broken, he just found the crack. And finding a crack doesn't make you powerful. It makes you someone who looks for cracks. The power is in the repair. I drove 4 hours to that lake not to confront a man and not to beg my wife to come home. I drove 4 hours to show myself that I was capable of knowing the worst thing and standing in it without falling over. I was. If you've been carrying an old wound and letting it live in the dark where other people can find it and use it against you, I want you to hear this directly. Name it. Say it out loud to someone you trust. Close it properly. Not because doing that protects you from people like Garrett Hollis. It does, but that's not the reason. Because you deserve to walk through your own life without a structural vulnerability someone else can exploit. You built something. Build it right. Build it to hold. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done differently? I read all of them. Hit that like button and subscribe to Hidden Drama Stories, and check the description for another story about the year I almost signed a contract that would have cost me everything I'd spent a decade building, and the one conversation that stopped me. I'll see you there. Take care of yourself, and build the thing that holds.